I'm briefly introducing the idea of paper one here, even though it's not going to be due for 4.5 weeks-ish, 5 weeks, just to give you an opportunity to start getting prepared for it. Paper one is going to be based on an article by Song et al. From 2023. It's centered around the idea or the question of whether LLMs have personality, and this is done by utilizing traditional self-assessment tests on large language models. So you don't need to start right now, but it's good to make sure that you can download the article and make sure that you can look at the rubric. It should be under week 6 section in D2L, so please take some time to look at that. If somebody does go to look at that and you're unable to find it, I would appreciate if you could send me an email and let me know that you were unable to find it. Also, if you are able to access it, read through it. Send me any questions you might have, any clarifying questions. This essay is minimal when it comes to the amount of points that are going to be available, only 25, and I believe there's well over 400 points available for the semester. So this will have relatively little impact on your overall grade. However, that is not to say that it will not have relatively large impact on your ability to successfully write the final paper. So while this is low stakes point-wise, I strongly encourage you to take the opportunity to engage with the assignment, read the article, take the time to attend to all the items on the rubric, because the feedback that you receive from me on this will be directly relevant and applicable to how you should be writing your final paper. For example, if I give you some stylistic comments on grammar or spelling or formatting of the document, and you don't, right, I'm only going to take off a few points on this paper, but if you don't incorporate those changes come final paper time, the amount of points that you're going to lose are going to be much more significant. So again, please take the time to engage with this. I think the article is pretty interesting as well, so it's an opportunity for you to learn and think about something new. I think it's just also kind of a fun question. It seems like it's right out of sci-fi. Does a computer have a personality, right? It seems like something that would have been in a cheap bookshop in the 70s. So take the opportunity to learn and engage with the material and use the opportunity to improve for the final paper. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email. Paper 1 and Paper 2 are both going to need to ensure that you have proper APA formatting. Paper 1 only has one in-text citation and one reference that you're going to need to incorporate, so it should be very low maintenance, low stakes, low effort for you, but you still need to do it, right? The paper is 25 points, and formatting is 5 points of that. So it's not a lot of points, but it is a lot relative to the assignment itself. What paper 1 should give you the opportunity to do is just practice putting in proper in-text citations for the Song et al. 2023 article and ensuring that you have it referenced properly at the end of the paper. You'll see in the rubric itself some of the criteria for you to get full points. But when it comes to the final paper, you're going to need to do more than just the one. So I recommend that you take the time to now, for paper 1, click on the Purdue OWL link and practice. Look through it, make sure that you're doing it correctly for paper 1. If you don't do it correctly, you'll get feedback from me to make sure that you do it correctly for the final paper. But if you go through Purdue OWL now, you can get full credit for the first paper and just set yourself up for more success later on. This slide itself has some of the guidelines that you're going to need to use. The Song et al. Article only has one author, so as you can see in the in-text citation, look to the last bullet point on this slide, and that should give you a good idea of what the in-text citation should look like. It's even in the same year, hence in 2023. Please make sure that you are attending to these stylistic and formatting items. They're equally important to the text, so they're going to be weighted meaningfully, right? They're going to have a significant impact on the grade of the paper, so take the time to do it correctly. Just like the prior page or the prior slide had an example of what your in-text citation should look like, this has an example of what your references should look like. Again, for paper 1, you're only going to have one, the Song et al. 23 article. What that means, however, is that it should be done perfectly, right? I expect on the bottom of your paper to have the Song et al. 2023 article referenced correctly, and that you can use it as an opportunity to get practice for the final paper. I hope many of you, most of you, if not all of you, have had some experience in past classes writing papers that have to be in APA format with references and citations. If not, this should be an opportunity for you to practice. In evolutionary personality psychology, David Buss sets out to explain how the evolutionary processes that shaped our ancestors' survival and reproductive success also shape the psychological traits and mechanisms that we see in modern humans. Rather than focusing exclusively on a single dimension, such as genetics, environment, or social context, Buss integrates them under the overarching principle of natural selection. He suggests that while personality psychology has often tried to remain within the bounds of describing traits and individual differences, it can and should be greatly enriched by understanding the adaptiveness of these traits. His article is a call to bring evolutionary thinking into personality research, thereby connecting the why of behavior with both the how and the what. The first aim of this article is to integrate evolutionary theory and personality psychology. David Buss aims to demonstrate that all aspects of personality, from extroversion to agreeableness, have an adaptive function and should be analyzed through the lens of evolutionary processes. The second is to present an alternative view to solely social or environmental explanations. While environment certainly matters, Buss's article challenges the idea that situational factors alone can account for the array of behaviors observed in humans. And the third is to highlight the importance of psychological mechanisms. The article underscores that without stable underlying mechanisms, shaped by millions of years of evolution, explanations of human behavior remain incomplete. Taken together, these goals underline Buss's broader thesis. You cannot fully understand personality without understanding the evolutionary forces that shaped it. So, does personality psychology actually need evolutionary theory? Evolutionary theory provides a unifying framework that can explain not just how traits exist, but why they evolved in the first place. Here are some key points. One is adaptation as a lens. When we view personality through the lens of adaptation, it becomes evident that individual differences are more than random variation. They are potential solutions to recurring challenges faced by our ancestors. Creationism and seeding theory versus evolution by natural selection. Buss contrasts the scientific foundation of evolutionary theory with creationist and extraterrestrial seeding theories. While people like myself, frankly, might be fascinated by ancient aliens, there is no evidence, based in the scientific method, which provides any actual evidence for this thought. And creationism stands in philosophical opposition to evolutionary theory, offering no empirical mechanisms by which species or their psychological traits change over time. As such, for a robust, evidence-based explanation of personality, the mechanisms of natural selection offer the most scientific grounding. Here, we will reference the social loafing example and psychological mechanisms. David Buss points out that if we observe a behavior, such as social loafing, in humans that is not found in other species, then we should look to uniquely human psychological mechanisms to explain it. This indicates a fundamental piece of causal explanation. Psychological mechanisms, as Buss emphasizes, are the machinery inside of us. Whether it's our capacity for complex group coordination or our sensitivity to social norms, these cognitive and emotional processes underlie behaviors that might otherwise seem puzzling. The fundamental situational error. Buss warns against attributing behavior purely to external context. If you assume that changes in situation alone explain obedience, conformity, or loafing, you overlook the internal decision rules and processes that make these behaviors possible in the first place. So this matters for a couple reasons. If we fail to consider that internal adaptations exist, we risk creating incomplete explanations, merely correlating environment to action without identifying the internal triggers and filters that shape how people respond to that environment. And then there's the result of evolution. These internal mechanisms did not appear from nowhere. They emerged through natural selection. Evolution provides the how behind the existence of these mechanisms, rather than leaving us to presume that they simply emerged randomly. One of the keystones of evolutionary psychology is the emphasis on domain-specific psychological mechanisms, or specialized systems designed to solve specific adaptive problems, such as the fear of snakes or detection of social cheaters, like we referenced in social loafing. If psychological mechanisms were generalized, we would rely on broad learning principles alone, as behaviorists like B.F. Skinner argued. In his view, and in that view in general, environment dictates everything, and inherited predispositions would be minimal. However, there is both empirical and conceptual support for psychological mechanisms being domain-specific, not general. Empirical violations of domain general laws. Right? There are violations of the generalized theory. Humans tend to fear snakes, spiders, and heights more readily than guns or cars, even though the latter are objectively more dangerous in modern environments. This illustrates the concept of prepared learning, which is more consistent with domain-specific adaptations than with simple, one-size-fits-all learning mechanisms, or domain general laws. This suggests that evolution has shaped creatures and humans to respond to specific, recurrent threats in distinct ways. Just as different physical environments favor different structural adaptations, like sweat glands for heat or thick fur for cold, humans' psychological environments also favor the development of specialized mental tools, such as personality. Ultimately, domain specificity underscores the precision with which natural selection sculpts the mind to address specific survival and reproductive challenges. Evolutionary psychology is best regarded as a theory about the origins, rather than the content, of human nature. It's not about individual fitness. Evolutionary psychology examines how certain traits or tendencies might have boosted survival or reproductive success over millennia, not necessarily within an individual's single lifetime. It addresses responding to specific challenges. Our ancestors faced particular predators, social dilemmas, and resource-related challenges, and the human mind evolved in response to these. It's not about making individuals fit in a vague sense. Rather, it's about addressing actual ecological pressures. So, why does this distinction matter? Some critics of this theory misunderstand evolutionary psychology as saying everything is about maximizing personal fitness, which is frankly a gross misunderstanding of the theory. In reality, it's about understanding how historical pressures shaped broad psychological architectures. The focus is on the ancestral environment that forged our current tendencies, not on real-time adaptation in one's personal life. When it comes to the origins of personality, we are thinking from a nomothetic lens. In a bit, when we talk about why there are individual differences in personality, we'll be looking at personality from an idiographic lens. Next, we should consider how internal psychological mechanisms give rise to observable behavioral strategies. Fundamentally, they are purposeful, not random. We've talked about this prior already. The lack of randomness is very important. Typically, humans do not behave in random or aimless ways. It might seem from an external perspective, but it's not the case. Our strategies and tactics are adaptive, used to solve problems related to survival, such as finding food and avoiding predators, and reproduction, such as attracting mates and caring for the offspring. There's also the importance of delineating between strategies, tactics, and acts. Think of it in terms of an umbrella. Strategies are the overarching plans or behavioral repertoires that help us achieve long-term goals. This is the top of the umbrella. Underneath, a smaller umbrella, are tactics. These are the short-term actions or maneuvers employed to realize a given strategy. And then the smallest umbrella underneath the prior two are acts. These are what observers actually see. Individual, concrete behaviors that are part of a larger tactical and strategic framework. From an evolutionary perspective, the existence of these layers ensures that we can respond flexibly to the complexities of our environment while still aiming towards the same adaptive endpoints. Here, we address how to identify psychological mechanisms and individual differences. Many branches of psychology aim to pinpoint universal mechanisms, traits that all humans share. But personality psychology often focuses on why individuals diverge from one another in these shared traits. This can be conceptualized as nomothetic versus idiographic. Nomothetic approaches look for universal laws and dimensions that apply to everyone. Think of the big five personality traits. While idiographic approaches focus on the uniqueness of the individual, asking why person A differs from person B, or why person A and person B differ from the group that they come from. Within the general theory of personality, an evolutionary perspective suggests that we first understand the universal set of problems humans face. Then, we look at how individuals vary in their solutions to these problems, whether that variation is genetic, developmental, or cultural. Adaptive problems include everything from finding food and safety to more complex social tasks, such as competing for status and forming alliances. Evolutionary psychologists assert that personality variation arises because different people, in different contexts, solve these adaptive problems using different strategies that have all remained viable over our species' history. A general theory of personality informed by evolutionary principles must highlight how core traits developed in response to survival and reproductive problems. At the same time, it must also explore why traits which address these problems vary across individuals. The complex world in which we live, with the varied environments that humans live in, favors a diversity of strategies to these problems, not one. On page 9 of his article, David Buss references human nature. Any theory of personality has to address, to some extent, what makes up human nature. We have many different answers to this question. Freud would say that human nature is about sex and aggression. Maslow would say that it is about self-actualization. And Skinner would say that human nature is nothing more than a condition of its environment. There are a few pieces of literature that Buss references which aim to address this question of human nature. For Buss, human nature is defined well by Tooby and Kosmides. Tooby and Kosmides say that it comprises the species-typical solutions that humans have evolved in response to the selective pressures we faced in our ancestral conditions. These pressures created a unitary human nature, but one that is susceptible to quantitative variation. In clearer words, human nature is consistent throughout the species, but manifests on a spectrum when analyzed in individuals. We'll go over some of the articles that Buss included with reference to specific aspects of human nature. In a 1990 article, Wiggins talked about agency and communion. Agency refers to our drive for power, dominance, and mastery, and can manifest as assertiveness, confidence, or leadership. While communion refers to our drive for affiliation, connectedness, and social bonding. This fosters cooperation, empathy, and the desire for harmonious relationships. This is relevant to evolution, as both agency and communion can be understood as adaptive responses. Gaining influence in a group and maintaining strong social ties are vital for survival in a species like ours. Hogan referenced status and popularity. His model is centered on the idea that striving for status or popularity can yield tangible evolutionary benefits, such as improved mate access or better resource provision. This matters because many of our achievements, from technological advancements to artistic expression, might be traced back to a desire, conscious or not, to increase social standing and thereby improve reproductive odds. Baumeister talks about anxiety as an adaptation. He suggests that anxiety is not simply a hindrance, but a vital emotional mechanism that warns us about potential social exclusion. This is very different from anxiety as a disorder as diagnosed in the DSM-5, and anxiety would be very, very different and much more useful in an ancestral environment as opposed to a modern environment. So from an evolutionary perspective, in small ancestral groups, being ostracized would drastically reduce someone's survival odds. Hence, the fear of rejection, albeit stressful and inducing anxiety, would serve an adaptive function of keeping us in good social standing and giving us access to the resource of the group. Cosmides talked about the cheater detection mechanisms, where he posited that our brains have evolved specialized modules for detecting cheating in social exchanges. He stated that these would provide an adaptive benefit, as those who could spot and avoid cheaters were much more likely to thrive in reciprocal relationships, preserving resources for both themselves and their kin. And the Daly and Wilson article talks about the parent-offspring conflict theory. Daly and Wilson critique Freud's Oedipal complex from an evolutionary angle, highlighting that children and parents often have competing reproductive interests. They aim to move past Freud by framing familial conflicts as evolutionary strategies, such as resource allocation amongst siblings. By doing this, they provide a grounded biological lens for viewing family dynamics, which attempts to place the psychosexual framework of Freud firmly in the past. Across these models, the central theme is that our motivations, be it to gain power, to avoid exclusion, or to detect cheaters, are not random quirks. They are deeply woven into our evolutionary history, shaped to help us succeed in the social and ecological landscapes of our ancestors. One of the central theoretical tenets of evolutionary theory is that behavior is goal-directed. Remember, going back to the idea of randomness, behavior is not random. When it is goal-directed, it is tied to solving core survival and reproductive tasks. Again, behavior is not random. In this sense, at least, evolutionary psychology and behaviorism are aligned. Buss proposed that personality can be conceptualized not just as static traits, but as dynamic strategies that people employ to attain crucial goals like mating, social status, or cooperative alliances. This perspective acknowledges traits such as extroversion or agreeableness as part of an arsenal of tactics to navigate complex social reality. He also stated that goals are universal. Humans across cultures engage in courtship, strive for status, and form alliances. The expressions or tactics might vary. Cultural norms influences how we go about impressing a mate or securing influence, but the overarching strategies reflect deeply ingrained evolutionary pressures. Framing personality in this functional context allows a richer understanding. Instead of labeling someone as outgoing, we might say they exhibit high extroversion because an extroverted strategy increases status or social connectedness within their environment. So, within the larger context of evolutionary psychology, personality, if it's going to be seen from an evolutionary perspective, must have adaptive functions. In other words, a key premise of evolutionary personality psychology as that the traits we see today have persisted because, in many contexts, they contributed and may still contribute to survival and reproduction. Just as behavior isn't random, variation is not either. Traits like extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness have repeatedly proven critical in helping individuals navigate ancestral environments. So let's take, for example, agreeableness. Cooperation fosters group cohesion and reciprocal altruism, traits beneficial for survival. Nonetheless, being too agreeable might lead to exploitation, highlighting that there are trade-offs. So, in reference to trade-offs, why is there a continuum? Each trait has adaptive pros and cons that vary by environment. For instance, high risk-taking can lead to large rewards, such as improved status or resources, but can also end in disaster. As a result, a range of risk-taking tendencies can persist in a population. And then we can see the Big Five as an adaptive map of human personality. Evolutionary psychologists see the Big Five not merely as convenient descriptors, but as central axes along which humans vary in both strategic and adaptive ways. So, why are there individual differences in traits? Going back to our conversation, or a brief touching on nomothetic versus idiographic. Evolutionary theory offers several explanations, each highlighting different processes that maintain variability. The first is the heritable alternative strategies. Like the orangutans that can be flanged or unflanged, humans may inherit tendencies that favor either a bold, risk-taking mating strategy or a more cooperative alliance-based strategy. Both persist because each can be successful under different conditions. Sometimes both are successful under the same conditions. Another is heritable calibration of psychological mechanisms. Traits like sensation-seeking are calibrated by genes that predispose some individuals to higher risk tolerance and others to lower. Both ends of the spectrum offer advantages and disadvantages depending on environmental and social contexts. The next is situationally contingent strategies. This states that people can and do adjust their personalities or behaviors to fit the situation with which they find themselves in. Thus, even a generally risk-averse person might exhibit risk-taking behavior when it promises substantial rewards or when resources are scarce. And finally, we have developmental calibration. Life experiences, especially in early childhood, can prime individuals to adopt certain strategies. For instance, growing up in a dangerous environment might speed up life history strategies, such as early reproduction or impulsivities, while a stable environment might support slower, more deliberate strategies. By understanding these four mechanisms, we grasp that variability in personality is not a puzzle that upends evolutionary theory. It is an expected byproduct of a complex adaptive system that must handle diverse environments. We began by discussing the framework and requirements for your upcoming personality paper, emphasizing the importance of proper APA formatting and a clear logical structure. Again, I strongly recommend that you all reference the materials included at the beginning of the slides and take the opportunity to really engage with the article from Song and take this opportunity to practice and incorporate the feedback that you receive so that your final paper, which is worth a very large percentage of your final grade, can be done well and attend to all the requirements. We examined how evolutionary theory, particularly as discussed in David Buss's 1991 article, serves as a powerful lens through which we can better understand the origins and functions of personality traits. We explored the notion of domain-specific psychological mechanisms, noting that universal learning laws do not fully explain phenomena like snake phobias or social loafing. We took a closer look at various models, such as Wiggins, Hogan, Baumeister, Cosmides, Daly, and Wilson, which each highlighted the adaptive nature of core human motivations: agency, communion, status, anxiety about exclusion, cheater detection, and parent-offspring conflicts. Through the lens of evolutionary psychology, we see personality traits as solutions to recurrent social and ecological challenges. Rather than describing things at traits at face value, we ask, which adaptive problems was this trait originally designed to solve? And lastly, we tackled the question of individual differences. Why not everyone adopts the same strategy or exhibits the same traits? We concluded that variation can be maintained through genetic alternatives, situational cues, and developmental processes. Evolutionary psychology often emphasizes domain-specific psychological mechanisms. How does this idea differ from a domain-general approach, such as behaviorism, and what are the implications for studying personality traits? As a reminder, domain-specific are psychological mechanisms that are specialized adaptations, evolved to address specific, recurrent, adaptive problems in humanity's ancestral environment, while domain-general is a capacity to learn by operant conditioning or to reason inductively. So, in other words, in domain general, psychological mechanisms are not tailored to adaptive challenges, but we learn how to use the few blueprints that are genetically encoded to address the challenges that we repeatedly face in our current environments. So, much of evolutionary psychology focuses on the why. In the case of personality, on the origins of personality resulting from natural selection. This looks at things from a nomothetic lens. Remember when we talked about nomothetic and idiographic earlier in the semester? So nomothetic is the general principles and laws, that is, those evolutionary pressures, which have acted to develop personality. Buss talks about the role of person-environment interactions. Here he emphasized that this person-environment effect does not reduce the meaning of evolutionary impact, but that they need to be taken together in what he calls an interactionist framework. So what are the reasons behind individual differences in personality persisting, even with the pressures of evolution? So in other words, why didn't evolutionary pressures reduce personality to just a few general domains, right? To those few blueprints that can be applied in different situations? What is the benefit of evolution building in difference?